The clock on the wall of the North Star diner read 4:55 a.m., its neon hum a lonely sound in the pre-dawn stillness of rural Pennsylvania. Elias Vance, a man whose hands had shaped an empire from oak and walnut, stared at the contract that would turn his life's work into sawdust. The document, a surrender disguised as a merger, lay on the sticky tabletop, its clauses a venomous litany of his failure. Across the booth, his grandnephew, the only family he had left, watched him with the patient hunger of a vulture. They thought the young waitress, perpetually refilling a coffee cup that was already full, was just part of the scenery. They were wrong. She wasn't just pouring coffee. She was seeing the ghost in the machine, the flaw in the wood, the one microscopic detail in the blueprint that betrayed the entire conspiracy. The mistake that would not just save a legacy, but ignite a revolution. The air in the diner booth was thick with the scent of stale coffee, bacon grease, and defeat. It was a smell Elias Vance, at 79, had never associated with his own life. For 60 years, the dominant scents had been of cedar shavings, linseed oil, and the sweet, earthy perfume of freshly cut American cherry wood. He was the founder, patriarch, and master craftsman of Vance Artisanal Furnishings, a company that had become a byword for quality in a world addicted to the disposable. His furniture wasn't just bought, it was inherited. Now, all that was about to end. The stack of papers pushed in front of him by his grandnephew, Julian Thorne, was the company's death certificate. The official title was a masterpiece of corporate euphemism, Strategic Integration Agreement between Vance Artisanal Furnishings and Synthwood Innovations, Inc. Elias knew it for what it was, a hostile takeover, executed with the smiling precision of an assassin. "It's time, Uncle Elias," Julian said, his voice a smooth, polished veneer that didn't quite conceal the impatience beneath. At 35, Julian was everything Elias was not. He wore a suit that cost more than the diner's monthly rent, his hair was sculpted with expensive product, and his eyes held the cold, transactional gleam of a man who saw the world as a series of assets to be leveraged. The banks have been patient, but their patience runs out when the market opens in New York. That's in 4 hours. This is the only lifeline. Lifeline. The word was a bitter joke. For the past year, Elias's company had been besieged by a string of catastrophes so perfectly timed they felt biblical. A fire at their main lumberyard in Oregon, destroying a priceless cache of century-old maple. A crippling cyber attack that had wiped their order books and client lists. A sudden, inexplicable exodus of his most senior craftsmen, lured away by anonymous, exorbitant offers. Each disaster had been a body blow, and now Vance Furnishings was on its knees, bleeding cash and crippled by debt covenants he could no longer meet. "Synthwood," Elias murmured, his voice a dry rasp. He ran a calloused thumb over the cover page. The name itself felt like an insult. "I've never even heard of them. Who are they?" "They're the future, Uncle," Julian said, tapping his Mont Blanc pen on the table. "They specialize in high-efficiency composite materials. They see the value in the Vance brand, the history. They want to modernize it, scale it, bring the Vance aesthetic to every home, not just the mansions of the 1%. With plastic and glue," Elias spat, the words tasting like ash. "My name, my father's name, on particle board garbage. It's not garbage, it's progress, and it's the only deal on the table," Julian pressed, his tone hardening. "If you don't sign, the banks foreclose at 9 a.m. They'll liquidate everything. The workshops, the designs, the tools your grandfather brought over from Germany. They'll sell it all for scrap. This way, The name survives. You get a comfortable retirement, a golden parachute. You can finally rest. Elias looked out the window at the rain-slicked asphalt of the empty parking lot. Rest. He had never rested. He had worked. He had built. He had taken the small cabinet-making shop his father had started, and, through sheer force of will and an uncompromising devotion to his craft, turned it into a legend. He knew the soul of wood, the way a dovetail joint should fit with the precision of a lover's embrace, the way a finish should feel like silk under a searching hand. Julian, with his MBA and his talk of synergy and scalability, understood none of it. He saw a balance sheet, a brand name to be exploited. He didn't see the lifeblood, the legacy. He looked around the diner. He'd been coming to the North Star for 40 years. It was his ritual, a 5 a.m. coffee and toast before heading to the workshop. It was the one place where he wasn't Mr. Vance, the titan of industry. Here, he was just Elias, the old man in the corner booth. The owners, the Kowalskis, knew his order by heart. The waitresses, a long succession of them over the decades, knew to keep his coffee black and hot. The current one, a quiet girl named Clara, moved with a weary grace. She couldn't be more than 20, with tired eyes that seemed to hold a sadness older than her years. Her uniform was clean but frayed at the cuffs. He'd seen her reading thick, serious-looking books behind the counter during lulls. Books about history, it looked like. She was a ghost in the background of his life, a silent witness to his morning routine, and now to his final humiliation. He picked up the pen. Julian's story made a grim kind of sense. The company was hemorrhaging money. The disasters had been too severe. Perhaps this was the only way to save the jobs of the 150 employees who still depended on him. Perhaps surrendering the soul of the company was better than letting it die completely. His hand trembled as he uncapped the pen. The ink-black nib hovered over the signature line. A final, damning period at the end of his life story. "More coffee, Mr. Vance?" The voice was soft, hesitant, but it cut through the suffocating tension like a chisel through soft pine. Clara stood by the table, a glass coffee pot in her hand. Julian shot her a look of pure venom. "We're in the middle of a private meeting. Go away," he snapped. Clara didn't flinch. Her gaze was fixed on Elias, and in her eyes he saw not the deference of a waitress, but a flicker of something else, concern, an almost painful empathy. "You look like you could use it, sir," she said, her voice steady. "You always say the first cup of the day is for waking up, but the second is for thinking." Elias managed a weak smile. He'd forgotten he'd ever said that to her. "Thank you, my dear. Yes, please." As she leaned forward to pour, her movements were efficient, practiced, but her eyes weren't on the stream of black liquid filling the thick ceramic mug. They darted, just for a second, to the documents on the table. Julian had unrolled a small blueprint next to the main contract, a technical drawing of some new furniture component, and next to it sat a small, polished block of what looked like dark wood. He'd been using them as exhibits in his closing argument. Clara's hand paused for a fraction of a second, an almost imperceptible hesitation. Her eyes narrowed slightly as they scanned the blueprint, then the block of wood. It was a glance that lasted no more than a heartbeat. But in that moment, the entire dynamic of the room shifted. She saw a detail, a tiny annotation in the corner of the drawing, a specific 5-digit code under the heading Core Material Specification. She saw the unnaturally perfect, repeating pattern of the grain on the sample block. She knew that code. She knew that pattern. Not because she was a waitress, but because of the life she'd had before this one. Before her family's own artisan workshop had gone bankrupt, before her father's heart attack, before she'd had to drop out of her program in material science and historical preservation to pay his medical bills. Her dream had been to be a museum curator, to preserve the very kind of legacy Elias Vance had built. Her brain, trained to spot fakes, to analyze material composition from microscopic clues, saw the lie instantly. She finished pouring the coffee and placed the pot back on its warmer. "Will there be anything else, sir?" she asked, her voice calm, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. "No! Get out!" Julian barked. Clara turned to leave. Every instinct screamed at her to walk away. This was not her fight. She needed this job. Her father's care depended on it. She was nobody. These men were powerful. Speaking up would mean getting fired, at best. But then she looked back at Elias Vance. She saw the profound, soul-crushing despair in the old man's eyes. He reminded her of her own father on the day he'd had to lock the doors to his workshop for the last time. A master craftsman defeated not by a lack of skill, but by a world that no longer valued it. Her feet stopped. Her shoulders squared. She turned around. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice clear and carrying across the quiet diner. Elias looked up, startled. Julian's face contorted with rage. "I told you to get out. I'll have you fired." "Mr. Vance," Clara repeated, louder this time, her eyes locked on his. "Before you sign that, you should ask your nephew why the core material specification on that blueprint is for AG1138 particle board, and you should ask him why he's showing you a sample of wood that isn't wood at all. It's a polymer laminate, printed with a repeating grain pattern." The silence that descended on the booth was absolute. It was a silence so profound it seemed to suck the very air from the room. Julian Thorne's carefully constructed composure shattered like cheap veneer. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a waxy, pale mask of disbelief and fury. The predator, so sure of its kill, had just been bitten by the mouse. He recovered in an instant, his panic metastasizing into rage. "What did you say?" he hissed, rising slightly from his seat, his body coiled like a snake. "Who the hell do you think you are? You're a waitress. You serve greasy eggs. You have no idea what you're talking about. You're disrupting a multi-million-dollar corporate negotiation. I'll sue you for slander." Elias Vance, however, didn't move. He slowly, deliberately, placed the cap back on his pen and set it down beside the contract. The fog of exhaustion and despair in his eyes was beginning to clear, replaced by a sharp, dangerous glint he hadn't felt in years. He had built his empire not just on skill, but on instinct. An instinct for the integrity of materials, for the truth in a piece of wood. And his gut, screaming for the past hour that something was deeply wrong, was now roaring in agreement with the girl in the cheap uniform. "Sit down, Julian," Elias said. His voice was quiet, but it carried the unmistakable resonance of command, the voice that had silenced boardrooms and brought architects to heel. "Uncle, this is absurd," Julian sputtered, gesturing wildly at Clara. "She's nobody. She's probably trying to shake us down for money." "The girl asked a question," Elias said, his gaze shifting to Clara. "A very specific question. AG1138. I don't know that number, but you look like you do. Why don't you answer her?" He turned his full attention to Clara, his old eyes searching her face. "Come here, child. Tell me your name." "Clara. Clara Rossi, sir." "Clara Rossi," Elias repeated, testing the name. "You said this isn't wood." He pointed a trembling, arthritic finger at the polished block on the table. "No, sir, it's not," Clara said, taking a hesitant step closer. She could feel Julian's hatred burning into her, but she was past the point of fear. Vance Furniture is famous for its unique, book-matched grains. No two pieces are ever identical. That sample, if you look closely, the pattern repeats every 3 inches. It's a digital print on a synthetic surface. A fake. As for the code on the blueprint, AG Wazelian 38, that's a designation for a low-grade, high-formaldehyde industrial particle board. It's banned for use in residential furniture in California and most of Europe because it off-gases toxins. It's used for cheap office dividers and shipping crates. Elias stared at the block of wood, then at the blueprint. He had been so focused on the financial ruin, he hadn't even bothered to look closely at the materials his supposed saviors were proposing. He had trusted Julian. "Show me," he commanded, his voice a low growl. Clara looked around, then walked to the counter and came back with a butter knife from the cutlery tray. She ignored Julian's strangled protest. She walked to the booth, took the polished block, and with a steady hand, scraped the sharp, serrated edge of the knife across its gleaming surface. The dark, rich, walnut finish peeled away like a cheap sticker, revealing a pale, sawdust and glue composite underneath. The ugly, mottled truth of it lay exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights of the diner. It was a fraud, a cheap, tawdry, insulting fraud. "You," Elias whispered, turning to Julian. His face was a thundercloud of grief and fury. "You were going to put my name on this poison?" Julian laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound, devoid of all humor. The mask was gone. The concerned nephew had vanished, replaced by something hard and cruel. "Poison? Don't be so dramatic, old man. It's business. That poison costs 1/20th the price of your precious, solid walnut. The margins are astronomical. We'd keep the Vance shell, the designs, the brand recognition, and swap out the expensive, time-consuming materials for this. The average idiot customer would never know the difference until it started falling apart in 5 years, and by then, we'd have sold the company again." "Synthwood Innovations," Elias said, the realization dawning. "They're not a real company, are they? It's you. You created it." "Very good," Julian sneered, sitting back down and crossing his arms, the picture of defiance. "A shell corporation, registered in Delaware, funded by a private equity group that loves my vision. The fire, the cyber attack, all carefully managed crises to drive down the company's valuation and force your hand. I orchestrated it all. I built a better, more profitable business model right under your nose. You tried to destroy me, your own family. You were destroying yourself," Julian shouted, slamming his hand on the table, making the coffee cups jump. "With your obsession with craft and legacy, you're a dinosaur. This is the 21st century. People don't want heirlooms. They want trends. They want cheap, fast. And now, you refuse to adapt, to franchise, to outsource to China. You are sitting on a gold mine and treating it like a damn museum. I am saving the value of this company from the one thing that was guaranteed to kill it. You." Elias Vance felt a pain sharper than any physical blow. The betrayal was so complete, so absolute, it left him breathless. He had treated Julian like a son, had given him a place in the company, had trusted him with its future. And all along, the boy had been plotting its demise. But Julian wasn't finished. He leaned forward, a triumphant smirk on his face. "And the best part is, it doesn't even matter that you know. This little waitress, with her party trick, she hasn't changed a thing. The facts remain. The company is insolvent. The loan covenants have been breached. The banks are still coming for you. At 9 a.m. sharp, they will trigger the liquidation clauses, You don't sign my deal. You lose everything anyway. The only difference is, now you get to lose it all, knowing I was the one who beat you." He glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 5:20 a.m. You have 3 hours and 40 minutes to decide. Sign the deal, walk away with your dignity and a few million, or refuse and watch 60 years of your life get sold for parts. Your move, uncle." The old man sank back into the cracked vinyl of the booth. He looked at the exposed particle board, then at the contract. Julian was right. The trap had been exposed, but the jaws were still closing. Clara had revealed the treachery, but she hadn't provided a way out. The financial reality was a gun to his head, and Julian still had his finger on the trigger. I have no choice," Elias whispered, the fight draining out of him once more. "He's right. I'm ruined either way." "No," a firm voice said. Both men looked at Clara. She was standing there, her arms crossed, her brow furrowed in concentration. The timid waitress was gone completely. In her place was someone else, someone with a fire in her eyes. "Excuse me?" Julian sneered. "Are you a corporate lawyer now, too? Or maybe an expert in bankruptcy law?" "I'm an expert in history," Clara said, her mind racing, connecting disparate pieces of information she'd absorbed over years of study and from overhearing Elias talk about his company's origins. "Mr. Vance, you didn't start this company. Your father did, right? In 1946. "That's right," Elias said, confused, just after he came back from the war. "And when you incorporated in the 1950s, did you do it as a standard C Corp?" she pressed. Elias frowned, digging deep into his memory. "No. My father was a stubborn man. He didn't trust modern banks or lawyers. He insisted we use the old Pennsylvania state charter for artisanal guilds. It was an archaic thing even then. Our lawyer at the time said it was sentimental nonsense, but my father insisted. He said it protected the craft itself. I haven't thought about that charter in 50 years. Clara's eyes lit up. She had read about those charters in a historical preservation class. They were relics of a bygone era, designed to protect master craftsmen from the encroachment of industrialization. Most had been dissolved or updated decades ago, but a few, she knew, were still legally on the books. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice trembling with a dawning excitement. "That charter! Does it happen to contain what's known as the Keystone Clause?" Julian burst out laughing. "The Keystone Clause? What is this, a fantasy novel? There's no such thing." "There is," Clara insisted, turning to Elias. "It was a unique provision in those old guild charters. It states that if the core artisanal integrity of the company is ever under existential threat, specifically through fraud, sabotage, or a forced conversion to inferior methods, the company's assets are automatically placed into a temporary protective trust, managed by the state's Historical Preservation Board. It freezes all creditor actions, all sales, all liquidations, for a period of 90 days to allow for an investigation. It was designed to stop exactly this, to stop men like him from destroying a craftsman's life's work. Elias stared at her, his mouth agape. He remembered the words now, his father's thick German accent echoing across the decades. "Das Keystone Clause. It protects the soul of the work, Elias. Not the money. The soul." He had thought it was just his father's poetry. "It's real," Elias whispered. "My God, I think it's real." Julian's face had gone from smug to panicked. "That's impossible. No court would recognize a 200-year-old law. It's a legal footnote." "It's not if it's in the founding corporate charter," Clara countered. "If that document was never amended, the clause is still active. It supersedes standard bankruptcy proceedings because it's the very foundation of the company's legal existence." Fine, Julian snarled, recovering his footing. Let's say your fairy tale is true. Where is this magical document? In a library somewhere? You think you can get a court order based on a waitress's memory of a history textbook before 9 a.m.? I have a team of lawyers from a top-tier Philadelphia firm ready to file the liquidation paperwork the second the court opens. You have nothing. No proof. No document. He was right. The argument was useless without the physical charter. Elias's mind reeled. Where would it be? In a bank vault? In his lawyer's office? No, his father had trusted neither. He was a man who hid his valuables in plain sight. Elias's eyes suddenly unfocused. He wasn't seeing the diner anymore. He was seeing his first workshop, the smell of sawdust in the air. He was seeing his father, old and frail, standing beside the first piece of furniture Elias had ever been allowed to design and build entirely on his own. A roll-top desk made from a single, magnificent piece of tiger maple. His masterpiece. His journeyman's test. A man's legacy, Elias, his father had said, running a hand over the desk's flawless finish, should be kept inside his finest work. It's in the desk, Elias said, his voice filled with a sudden, surging hope. What desk? Julian demanded. My journeyman desk, the one in my old office at the main workshop. My father. He built a hidden compartment into it. He said that's where the company's soul belonged. The charter. It has to be there. The workshop was 20 minutes away. The clock on the wall read 5:45 a.m. Let's go, Clara said, already grabbing her worn coat. You're not going anywhere, Julian shouted. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling security at the plant. I'm the acting COO. I'll have you both arrested for trespassing. Elias stood up, and for the first time that morning, he seemed to grow to his full height. The stooped, defeated old man was gone. In his place stood the founder, the patriarch, the lion. Those security guards are men I hired myself, men whose fathers I worked alongside. Their loyalty is to the man who signs their paychecks, not the boy who's trying to burn the place down. Let's see who they listen to. He threw a $20 bill on the table. For the coffee, my dear, he said to Clara. Then he looked at Julian, his eyes as hard as granite. You have made a grave mistake. You thought I was just an old man, but you forgot what I do for a living. I take what is broken and I make it whole again. He turned and walked towards the door, Clara right beside him. The race was on. The drive to the Vance Artisanal Furnishings workshop was a frantic, rain-lashed blur. Elias's old Lincoln Continental, a car as solid and well-built as his furniture, ate up the dark country roads. The wipers beat a frantic rhythm against the windshield, a percussive accompaniment to the frantic thumping of Clara's heart. He'll call his lawyers, Clara said, her voice tight with anxiety as she stared into the darkness. He'll tell them to be ready. Even if we find the charter, how do we get it authenticated and filed before they file the liquidation? My personal lawyer is a man named Samuel Bell, Elias said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. He's old school. His father was my father's lawyer. He's 75, semi-retired, and probably still asleep. But if I call him, he will answer. The problem is proof. Without the physical document in his hands, his word means nothing against a team from a major firm. How fast can he get to a courthouse? Sam lives an hour north of here. The main county courthouse is 40 minutes south. The timing is impossible, Elias admitted, a sliver of the earlier despair returning. Even if we find it, we're out of time. Clara's mind was a whirlwind. She thought about her preservation studies, the painstaking process of authenticating historical documents. It required experts, specific lighting, magnification. But in the digital age, there had to be a faster way. The charter. she said, thinking aloud. Does it have any unique markings? A corporate seal? A specific watermark? Of course, Elias said. The Vance Guild seal. My grandfather designed it. It's a wood plane, inside a circle of oak leaves. It's embossed on the paper. Okay, Clara said, a desperate plan forming. We find the document. We take high-resolution photographs of it with my phone. We need clear shots of the seal, the signatures, and especially the keystone clause. We email them to Mr. Bell. It might not be admissible as a final document, but it could be enough for him to file an emergency injunction, a motion to stay the proceedings, pending verification of the original. It could buy us time. Elias glanced at her, a look of profound respect in his eyes. You think of everything, don't you, Clara Rossi? I'm used to solving problems with whatever tools I have, she said simply. They pulled up to the main gate of the workshop complex. A single pickup truck was parked by the security shack, its engine idling. As Elias's Lincoln approached, a burly man in a security jacket stepped out, holding a large flashlight. It was Frank, the night watchman. Mr. Vance, what are you doing here at this hour? Frank asked, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. Just then, his radio crackled. A dispatcher's voice, tinny and urgent, filled the air. All units be advised. Per COO Julian Thorne, Elias Vance is to be denied access to the property. He is no longer authorized. If he attempts to enter, you are to detain him for trespassing. Frank looked from the radio back to Elias. He was a man caught between two conflicting orders. He had worked at the plant for 30 years. Elias had given him the job after he'd been laid off from the local steel mill. Frank, Elias said, rolling down his window, his voice calm and steady. My nephew is trying to sell this company to a group of asset strippers. He's committing fraud. I need to get into my old office. I am still the chairman and majority shareholder of this company. That order is illegal. Frank hesitated, his hand hovering over the gate controls. My orders are from Mr. Thorne, sir. He's management. And I am the owner, Elias's voice boomed. Who paid for your daughter's college scholarship, Frank? Was it Julian and his spreadsheets? Or was it the Vance family trust? I need 5 minutes. That's all I ask. Frank looked at Elias's face, then at the determined young woman beside him. He switched off his radio. The camera on this gate has been malfunctioning all week, sir, he said, pressing the button to open the heavy iron gate. You've got 10 minutes before I have to log the malfunction. Thank you, Frank, Elias said, and drove through. The main workshop was cavernous and dark, smelling of sawdust and turpentine. It was a cathedral of craft, silent and sleeping. Elias led the way with a surprising agility, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. He didn't head for the modern administrative offices, but for a small, wood-paneled room tucked away at the back of the building. His first office. It was more of a museum now, filled with old tools, framed photographs, and in the center of it all, the tiger maple roll-top desk. It was a magnificent piece of furniture, its wood grain shimmering like a trapped fire even in the dim light. The compartment, Elias breathed, running his hand over its surface. My father showed me the trick once. A sequence. You have to press 3 specific points in the wood, in the right order. He closed his eyes, his mind traveling back 60 years. He pressed a knot in the wood on the left pedestal, then a point along the carved trim, then a small inlay on the desktop. For a moment, nothing happened. Julian's mocking laughter seemed to echo in the silent room. Then, with a soft, satisfying click, a section of the side panel popped open, revealing a hidden cavity. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a single, large envelope made of thick, yellowed parchment, sealed with dark red wax, the Vance Guild seal. "We found it," Clara whispered, a wave of relief washing over her. Elias's hands shook as he lifted it out. He broke the seal and carefully slid out the document. It was a single, large piece of vellum, covered in the elegant, looping script of a mid-century clerk. And there, under Article 7, was the heading, "The Keystone Clause." "Get your phone," Elias said, his voice thick with emotion. Clara worked quickly, her hands surprisingly steady. She laid the document flat on the desk, using Elias's flashlight to ensure the lighting was perfect. She took a dozen pictures, capturing every detail, every signature, every word of the crucial clause. As the final image uploaded, the main doors to the workshop crashed open. Julian stood there, flanked by 2 other men in suits. They were his lawyers. "It's over, Uncle," Julian yelled, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "Whatever little historical artifact you've found, it's too late. It's 7:30 a.m. My legal team is on a conference call with the bank's attorneys right now. They're preparing the joint filing for the court. Your little Waitress can't stop $100 million foreclosure." "Send the email," Elias said to Clara, never taking his eyes off Julian. Clara hit send. A small swoosh sound from her phone was the only reply. "You think an email is going to save you?" Julian laughed, taking a step forward. "You have no idea how this works. Possession is everything. We have the legal teams. We have the momentum. By the time your sleepy old lawyer even gets his pants on, this company will belong to me." Elias's phone buzzed in his pocket. He put it on speakerphone. The crackly, indignant voice of Samuel Bell filled the room. "Elias? What in God's name is this? An email at this hour with pictures of your father's mad scribblings? I just got off the phone with some slick-haired piranha from Philly who told me you were being liquidated. What the devil is going on?" "Sam, it's all true," Elias said. "Julian has tried to defraud the company. The document is real, the Keystone Clause. Is it valid?" There was a pause on the other end of the line, filled with the sound of rustling papers. "The Artisanal Guild Charter," Sam muttered. "My God. I remember my father. Tell." The crackle of Samuel Bell's voice over the speakerphone was a thin thread of hope in the vast, cold workshop. But Julian's triumphant laughter was a pair of shears threatening to sever it. "An eyebrow, Sam? That's all you have?" Elias watched, his heart a cold, heavy stone in his chest, as one of Julian's lawyers, a man with the predatory stillness of a shark, all polished shoes and soulless eyes, stepped forward. The man's movements were fluid, economical. He plucked the vellum charter from Elias's trembling grasp as easily as taking a toy from a child. "This document is now considered material evidence in a pending corporate action," the lawyer stated, his voice a monotone hum that was somehow more chilling than a shout. "It will be placed in our firm's custody for authentication." Custody. A sterile word for theft. A legal term for a cage. Elias lunged, a guttural roar tearing from his throat, a primal sound of a creator seeing his creation desecrated. The second lawyer, younger but built like a college athlete, intercepted him, his hand a firm, impersonal barrier against Elias's chest. The old man staggered back, the fighter not leaving his eyes but the strength leaving his limbs. He was 79. He had fought gravity, time, and the stubborn will of wood his entire life. He could not fight this. Julian's smile was a masterpiece of cruelty. "It's over, Uncle. Your fairy tale charter will be buried under 1,000 pages of discovery motions. We'll debate its authenticity until the company is nothing but a line item in a bankruptcy filing. You had your chance. You should have taken the money." They held all the cards, the physical proof, The legal muscle, the inexorable clock. Elias looked at Clara. Her face was pale in the dim light, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with a ferocious, incandescent concentration. Her mind was working, gears turning, searching for a flaw in the trap that had just snapped shut around them. Her gaze darted from the lawyer holding the charter to Julian, and then to the magnificent roll-top desk. It settled on the empty, velvet-lined cavity where the company's soul had rested for 70 years. And she saw it. A ghost. A detail hidden in plain sight. She walked forward, her steps silent on the concrete floor. The lawyers tensed, but she ignored them, her focus absolute. She reached into the secret compartment, her fingers brushing against the worn velvet. Tucked into a nearly invisible slit in the lining was a thin, brittle piece of paper, folded into a small square. A receipt. With the reverence of an archaeologist unearthing a relic, she unfolded it. Julian scoffed. What now? Found a 70-year-old grocery list? Clara didn't answer him. Her voice, when it came, was clear and steady, cutting through the tension like a master's saw through perfect grain. Mr. Vance, when your father had this charter drawn up, he was a German immigrant, wasn't he? Deeply mistrustful of institutions after what he'd seen in Europe. He trusted nothing but his hands and his God, Elias rasped, his eyes fixed on the small paper in her hand. Exactly, she said. He wouldn't have just hidden the original. He would have created a fail-safe. He would have made it official. She turned the paper towards Julian's lawyers, her hand as steady as a surgeon's. This is a notarized certification receipt from the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania State Archives, dated October 17, 1952. It confirms that the document with the serial number PA Guild 046, designated as the Vance Artisanal Guild Charter, was recorded, photographed, and entered into the state's permanent archival record. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Attached is a microphotograph of the charter's first page, clearly showing the embossed seal and my client's father's signature. The original document you're holding is a beautiful piece of history. But this, she held up the receipt, is the legally unimpeachable proof of its existence and its registration with the state. This is what a judge will see. She took out her phone, snapped a crystal-clear photo of the receipt, and sent it. Mr. Bell will be filing this with his emergency injunction. And I imagine the district attorney's office might be interested in the fact that you, she looked directly at the lawyer holding the charter, have just committed felony theft of evidence that is now, officially, on the state record. The air in the workshop changed. The temperature seemed to drop. The shark-like lawyer looked at the receipt, then at Julian, then at the vellum in his hands. His professional composure evaporated, replaced by the naked panic of a man who sees his career, and possibly his freedom, about to go up in flames. He didn't just place the charter back on the desk, he recoiled from it, as if it were white-hot. Julian stared, his face a canvas of disbelief morphing into pure, distilled hatred. The smirk was gone, the condescension, the triumph. All that remained was the raw, ugly core of a man who had been utterly and completely outmaneuvered, not by a titan of industry, but by a waitress who read history books. The clock on the workshop wall, a simple, honest design, made by Elias himself 30 years ago, struck 8:20 a.m. Its quiet, wooden chime was not the sound of an ending. It was the tolling of a bell, signaling the start of a new round. The 90 days granted by the Keystone Clause were not a sanctuary. They were a trench. The legal battle that followed was brutal and attritional. Julian, abandoned by his private equity backers who scattered like cockroaches when the word fraud entered the conversation, fought with the feral desperation of a cornered animal. His new, cheaper lawyers tried every tactic. They claimed Elias was senile, that Clara had hypnotized him, that the charter was a forgery created to manipulate the market. The crucible of this war was a small, airless deposition room in Philadelphia. Elias sat beside Clara, watching as Julian's lawyer, a man named Harker, with a perpetually sneering expression, circled her like a hyena. "Miss Rossi," Harker began, his voice dripping with condescension. "Let's be clear about your credentials. You have, 2.5 years of a liberal arts degree from a community college? I have a 4.0 GPA in material science and historical preservation studies from Penn State, which I was forced to postpone due to a family medical emergency," Clara replied, her voice level. Her hands were clasped tightly in her lap, the only sign of her tension. "Ah, yes. A medical emergency. So, you are not a lawyer? Not an accountant? Not a certified document examiner?" "I am not." "So, you are, for all intents and purposes, a waitress, a server of coffee and pancakes, who stumbled upon a legal theory you read about in a textbook." "I am a person who knows the difference between real wood and a polymer laminate printed with a repeating pattern," Clara said. "And I know the difference between a man's life's work and a scheme to defraud it." Elias felt a surge of pride so fierce it almost brought him to his feet. He had spent his life surrounded by men who spoke of value in terms of stock prices and profit margins. This young woman spoke of integrity as if it were a tangible thing, as real and solid as the oak he built with. Harker leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Isn't it true, Miss Rossi, that you saw an opportunity? An old, wealthy, perhaps confused man, estranged from his family. A perfect target for a young woman with ambitions. Did you not see a path to a life far more comfortable than one spent refilling coffee cups?" The accusation hung in the sterile air, vile and suffocating. Before Clara could even respond, Elias slammed his palm down on the conference table. The sound cracked through the room like a rifle shot. The court stenographer jumped. Samuel Bell placed a restraining hand on his arm. "That is enough." Elias's voice was a low, dangerous rumble. He rose slowly, his towering height seeming to diminish the sneering lawyer. "You will address this young woman with respect. She possesses more intelligence, more honor, and more integrity in a single breath than you or my grandnephew have displayed in your entire miserable lives. She is not a witness you are cross-examining. She is the mind that unraveled your entire conspiracy, and you will accord her that. Or this deposition is over, and I will see you and your client in court, where I will take great pleasure in funding your public humiliation with every last dollar I have." The room was silent. Harker, for the first time, looked flustered. He stammered, looked to his own client for support, but Julian just stared at the table, his face grim. The attack had failed. Clara's quiet dignity, buttressed by Elias's volcanic defense, had rendered it impotent. That night, driving back to the workshop, the silence in the car was heavy, but companionable. "He reminded me of my father," Clara said softly, breaking the quiet. "The day our shop went bankrupt, the bank's lawyer spoke to him like he was a fool, a child who didn't understand the modern world. He just sat there and took it. It broke something in him." She turned to look at Elias. "Thank you for not letting him do that to me." "Clara," Elias said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "My father used to say that a man's legacy is not what he builds, but who he builds it for. For 60 years I thought he meant my customers, my family, He shook his head. I was wrong. A legacy isn't an object you hand down. It's a fire you pass on. Julian wanted the ashes. You protected the flame. In that moment, the nature of his victory and the future of his company became terrifyingly clear. It wasn't about saving the past. It was about earning the future, and that future was sitting right next to him. The legal victory, when it came on the 87th day, was total. The court upheld the Keystone Clause, affirmed the charter's authenticity, and the district attorney unsealed a multi-count indictment against Julian for fraud, conspiracy, and arson. But it was a Pyrrhic victory. The company was saved from Julian, but not from reality. It was a ship that had survived the hurricane, only to find itself becalmed in a dead sea, its sails shredded, its coffers empty. The 90-day freeze would lift, and the banks, patient but unsentimental, would be waiting. They're proposing a structured sale, Samuel Bell explained, his face grim over a video call. They'll sell the brand name to one buyer, the real estate to another, the machinery to a third. They'll get their money back. Vance Furnishings will cease to exist as anything more than a trademark on a line of Chinese-made laminate furniture. It was Julian's vision, realized through other means. A death by 1,000 cuts instead of a single blow. Elias felt the old despair creeping back, a cold fog at the edge of his mind. He was in the main workshop, the silence of the machinery a deafening roar in his ears. Clara found him there, running a hand over the cold, still surface of a massive bandsaw. "We are not going to let that happen," she said. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. "The numbers don't lie, my dear," Elias said wearily. "We have no capital, no new orders. We are a ghost." "No," she countered, holding up a thick binder. "We are a story, and a good story is the most valuable currency there is." For the past month, while the lawyers had been fighting, Clara had been building. She had compiled a list of the 100 families and firms that had been the bedrock of Vance's clientele for decades. She hadn't just looked at their order history. She had researched their histories, their values. She had then written to each of them, not as a CEO but as a storyteller. She told them everything: the diner, the fake wood, the charter, the fight. She laid the soul of the company bare. Her plan was audacious, born of desperation and brilliance. "We can't get a loan from a bank because they see us as a risk," she explained, her eyes alight with passion. "So we don't ask them. We ask our community. I'm proposing the Centennial Bond. It's not a donation. It's an investment in integrity. 100 clients, a $100,000 bond from each. It's a pre-purchase, a credit against 100 years of future commissions, repairs, and new creations for their families. It gives them a stake in our survival. And it gives us $10 million in operating capital, interest-free." It was madness. It was asking the patrons of a dying church to pay for its resurrection. But Elias saw the genius in it. It wasn't a financial transaction. It was a covenant. The responses trickled in at first, then became a flood. Checks arrived with handwritten notes. "My grandfather's desk was made by your father. Of course we'll help. In a world of fakes, we need something real to survive." But there was one holdout, the one that mattered most to Elias: Arthur Abernathy, a third-generation client whose family had commissioned pieces from Elias's father. Abernathy was old money, a titan of industry himself, and his endorsement would bring the rest in line. But his reply was a polite but firm no. "I cannot invest in a museum, Elias," he'd written. "I admire your craft, but the world has moved on." Elias knew he had to face him in person. He and Clara flew to New York and met Abernathy in his stark, minimalist Park Avenue office, a room filled with glass, steel, and modern art. "Arthur," Elias began, "this is not about preserving a museum." "Then what is it about?" Abernathy asked, his eyes cold. "Nostalgia, a refusal to accept that the era of the lone artisan is over." "It's about evolution," Clara said, stepping forward. "Mr. Abernathy, you're right. The world has changed. Vance can't survive by just making beautiful, expensive things for the wealthy. That is a museum. The soul of this company isn't just the finished product. It's the knowledge, the craft, the integrity. That's what we're asking you to invest in." She laid out a new plan on his sterile glass table. "The Centennial Bond doesn't just fund the workshop, it funds the future. We're launching the Rossi Apprenticeship Program," she said, her voice gaining strength. "Named for my father. We'll partner with trade schools and inner-city youth programs. We'll teach them the craft, but we'll also teach them modern design, CNC machining, sustainable forestry. We won't just build furniture, we'll build craftsmen. We will take the soul of Vance, the integrity of the material, the perfection of the joinery, and we will apply it to new designs, new materials, new markets. We will make things that are built to last for a generation that has been taught to throw everything away." Abernathy listened, his expression unreadable. He looked from Clara's passionate face to Elias's proud one. He saw not a defeated old man and his caretaker, but a master and his successor. A legacy not of blood, but of spirit. "You're not just saving a company," Abernathy said slowly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "You're starting a movement." He opened a desk drawer, took out a checkbook, and began to write. 6 months later, the Vance Artisanal Furnishings Workshop was not humming. It was singing. The sound was a symphony of old and new, the familiar rasp of a hand plane, the high-tech whine of a 5-axis CNC router, the murmur of a master craftsman teaching an apprentice, the sharp clicks of Clara's keyboard as she finalized a new design on a tablet. Elias stood on the mezzanine overlooking the floor, a place he now called his perch. He no longer worked the benches, but his presence was everywhere. He was the guardian of the standard, the keeper of the history, the quiet mentor who could spot a flawed joint from 50 feet away. Clara joined him, handing him a mug of coffee from the North Star diner, which they now had delivered every morning. "News from Sam Bell," Elias said, his voice a low rumble. "Julian's sentencing was this morning. 15 years, no parole, wire fraud, arson, the works." Clara looked out over the bustling workshop. A young woman, one of the first Rossi apprentices, was carefully sanding a piece of maple, her face a mask of pure concentration. "He got what he deserved," she said quietly. "He tried to erase a story. It's only right that his own story ends in a cage." "He wrote me a letter," Elias said with a dry chuckle. "Asked if I would send him a book on woodworking to pass the time." "Did you?" Clara asked, a small smile playing on her lips. "I sent him a single, perfectly cut, 1-foot square block of AG 1138 particle board," Elias said. "I included a note. Contemplate this." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the dance of creation below. "I am officially retiring tomorrow," Elias said, not looking at her. "The board meeting is a formality. They will elect you chairwoman. The company is yours, Clara. The legacy." Clara looked at the old man, her friend. She saw the lines of worry on his face had softened, replaced by a deep, settled peace. She thought of her father, of the defeat in his eyes, and felt a pang of sorrow and gratitude so sharp it took her breath away. "My first act as chairwoman," she said, her voice firm, will be to sign the purchase order for the North Star Diner. Elias turned, a surprised look on his face. The Kowalskis are ready to retire, she explained. We're buying it and turning it into a non-profit, a co-op for the employees, a place where a cup of coffee is always hot and no one ever has to worry about their future. She looked at him, her eyes shining. A company's soul isn't just in what it makes. It's in how it cares for the people who make it and the community that supports it. That's the story I want to tell. Elias didn't laugh. He smiled, a slow, deep smile that seemed to come from the very core of his being. He reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder, a hand calloused and strong, a hand that had shaped a world from wood. It was not a gesture of succession. It was a gesture of partnership. Below them, the symphony of the workshop played on, a sound of a legacy not just saved, but finally, truly understood.